Hi, this is Chris Marchand of Between the Songs podcast. I'm here with Joe Cook to tell you about another podcast we've created, and we hope, if you've enjoyed Between the Songs, that you'll enjoy this one too.
It's called Nostalgic Future Podcast, and that's what it's all about. Chris and I dive deep into our nostalgia, all the pop culture stuff that we grew up with, and we examine how it's influenced our lives and how that continues today and into the future.
So join us for fun discussions about some of our favorite movies, television shows, music, books. Really, nothing is off limits. We even have special guests on from time to time to talk about some of their nostalgic obsessions.
Check out Nostalgic Future Podcast, available now on all the big podcasting apps, and you can also follow us on social media. It's Nostalgic Future Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and we're at Past Future Pod on Twitter.
Nostalgic Future Podcast, where the past is the only way forward. Welcome to Rich Mullins Between the Songs podcast. This is the show where two Rich Mullins superfans break down every single one of his albums, and even more. We're going to take an episode by episode look at every single one of his albums that he ever put out. This is our inaugural episode, and it's going to be a good one, I promise. My name is Chris Marchand, and I'm with Post Consumer Reports. It's a blog and also its own podcast. And with me I have my co-host.
I am Joe Cook, and I am I guess you would call it the founder of the Rich Mullins Ragamuffin Archive on YouTube. And it's great to be here with you, Chris.
This is great. This is an idea that's been percolating in our minds for a little bit. The idea is every episode will just kind of zero in on one album, or maybe perhaps a project of his, because Rich Mullins, a musician, a thinker, a poet, a teacher, perhaps. He did a lot of things. He had a lot of irons in the fire, and he wasn't just a musician. And so there's going to be a chance to take a look at other aspects of his art. But what we're going to do is, along with looking at his albums, we're going to be able to interview some people as well and talk to some people that knew him and worked with him.
Absolutely, and I'm really excited because today we kind of get to launch this podcast in style, talking to one of our, I think, for both of us, our musical heroes, and a guy who was a longtime member of Rich's band, was a founding member of the Ragamuffin Band, Jimmy Abegg. And we've got a great conversation with Jimmy on the project that he's working on right now, the Be Gods, a celebration of Rich Mullins project, which is currently on Pledge Music. So we're going to hear more from Jimmy later.
Yeah, and there's a lot to this project. If you go to the Pledge Music site, I think it's even just Pledge Music /Rich Mullins. It's as simple as that. There's a lot to the project. There's a short documentary film. There's an album featuring old songs of Rich Mullins's that really have not seen the light of day, or at least not much of the light of day. There's a tribute album. You can even buy some original prints of some photography from Jimmy Abegg and Ben Pearson.
Yeah, they have the high quality replicas of Rich's original handwritten lyrics from the Jesus record.
There you go. That's nuts. Yeah.
Not to mention that Jimmy's working on what looks to be a beautiful fine art photo book.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about the book. A book features some essays from Mullins' longtime producer, Reed Arvin. There might be more writing in there as well, but I know that Arvin is kind of the featured there. But also photography. It's going to be this beautiful book that like a fine art photography book. Now here's the thing I wanted to say about Jimmy Abegg. We'll get into talking about him later, but Jimmy Abegg, to me, represents perhaps one of the problems of Christian music, which is a vast majority of people go, huh? Who? And I'm like, okay, slow down here. This is Jimmy Abegg we're talking about. He's a prolific guitarist. He's been a renowned artist for years now. And yet, because he's within the realm of Christian music, people really don't have a clue of what he's done or who he is. I mean, a few of us do, and we're chastised. We're like, why would you know about these people? And I'm like, man, if this guy was in the secular industry, he'd be renowned as like a studio musician. Everybody would know he's the go-to guy. But because this is Christian music, it's a little bit different.
It's true. I actually remember, I've met Jimmy a few times over the years, and one of the times that I met him was in Nashville this had to be about 15, 16 years ago, maybe longer. It was during GMA Week, the Gospel Music Association, when they had their big week-long festivities they used to have down there leading up to the Dove Awards. And during that time, Jimmy was the imaging czar for Rocketown Records. Mm. And he was hosting, it was something called, I think it was called Midnight Movies. And he had went around and the entire convention with a camera and did these funny little movies. And it was kind of like, the Christian music version of Punk'd. He was kind of messing with people. It was really funny. And but anyway, I remember leaving that event, and because some of the videos were really a little out there, and this lady who was in Christian music, not from Nashville though, not in the Nashville scene. She was at the convention for something, and she's leaving, and she's just going, "What on earth was that? And who was that guy?" And I said, "Well, that's Jimmy Abegg," and she had no idea who he was. And I told her about his work, and she was absolutely floored that she had been up there spending an hour with this guy and had no idea what he had done, in Christian music.
Mm-hmm. So in the mid '80s, he was in kind of, I don't know if we call it a punk new wave band, electronica kind of band called Vector.
Vector, yeah.
That was maybe 2 or 3 albums worth. He kind of shared lead singer duties in that group. He kind of rose to prominence as part of Charlie Peacock's band. Him and Vince Ebo, Charlie Peacock, Vince Ebo, Jimmy Abegg recorded this really great raw live album. And so that's another aspect of Jimmy's career.
Yeah, we were talking about this, I remember, off the podcast, maybe a couple weeks ago, about that video that they had put out. It was, I think, the Charlie Peacock Front Row VHS video, which was phenomenal.
Does it exist on YouTube? Is it out there? Do you know?
I'm pretty sure it is, yeah.
So, okay, let's say you're approaching this podcast and you're like, I like Rich Mullins, Jimmy Abegg, I don't know anything about him. Look up Charlie Peacock, Jimmy Abegg, Vince Ebo. Try to find this live video, and you tell me that Jimmy Abegg isn't one of the more proficient guitarists of his generation. Just watch his work on that video. This is from the 80s, I think, or early 90s.
It was like 89 or 90. It's way back.
Yeah. Anyway, there you go. That's Jimmy. We're going to get into him in a minute. But before we do that, this is our inaugural episode, and I thought it's worth talking. Like, why are we doing this? Like, why does this episode? Why does this whole podcast exist? Is it worth doing? Is this necessary? And so here's what I'll preface it with. I remember a few years ago now. I've been married 11 years this June, and a while early on in our marriage, I said to my wife, you know what? I'm really concerned about kids growing up nowadays because they're not going to have an artist like Rich Mullins to listen to change their lives, to rattle their spiritual lives. I'm just really, there's just not an artist like that. And my wife very soberly just looked at me and she said, "Chris, kids didn't listen to Rich Mullins when you were a kid." And I just go, "Oh," and I was really deflated. And what she was trying to say is to me, Rich Mullins was the artist for me. Now, I have many artists, just like yourself. You can name some of yours, I can name some of mine, but I would say for me, Rich Mullins is the artist. But I realized that in some ways, most people don't care. I mean, he became prominent in the age of grunge rock, alternative rock music, and here was this guy playing some really sincere folk music, you could say. And most youth of our age were not, they were not zeroing in on Rich Mullins, and they're not zeroing in on him now, even though he's a renowned artist. All I wanted to say was, the reason we're doing this is because we're actually going to be contemplating this guy's music, this guy's art, and is it worth remembering, and is it worth still talking about today?
Well, one of my favorite things that you've ever written was in your last blog post about the Rich Mullins the Be God's Project. You wrote your article about your concerns. Mm-hmm. And in that article, you mentioned that Rich Mullins to you is the Bob Dylan of Christian music. To which somebody quickly pointed out that Bob Dylan was the Bob Dylan of Christian music, which is kind of funny and true, I guess.
I think the guy said, not even Bob Dylan could be the Bob Dylan of Christian music.
That's what it was. Well, but the thing about that to me, in secular music, there are, your Bob Dylans, your Brian Wilsons, there are people who, your Lennon McCartneys who speak to a generation.
Yeah.
And Christian music is, it's definitely a subgenre. And so for me, Rich Mullins, when I was a teenager getting into Christian music in the 90s, there were other artists I liked. There were albums in Christian music that mean a lot to me. But I can't think of any other artist whose entire body of work has impacted me like Rich Mullins did. And in a lot of ways, that's like a Bob Dylan. That is, that is a poet and a true artist. And I think that, that's why for me this makes sense what we're doing, because this is a body of work here that has quite literally impacted and changed the lives of thousands upon thousands of people.
Mm-hmm. So, to why we're doing this podcast, quite simply, it has to do with numbers. It's the year 2017. It's the 20th anniversary of Rich Mullins' death coming up this September. Is it September 19th? Am I getting that right?
Yep.
So September 19th, 20th anniversary of his death. And there's a number of 20th anniversary kind of tribute projects that are happening. We'll talk more about those later on, right?
Yeah, and there's quite a few of them happening, and even more that we kind of know are in the pipeline, but we can't even talk about yet.
Yeah, so as we document album by album, we will also be updating everyone with, hey, this is the latest Rich Mullins-based project to come out. Please check it out. And we're happy to be able to offer what some of these really kind of some of these great ideas that are happening this year. Another reason why we're doing this, and it's funny, in a message to me a little while ago, you said some people like to do fantasy football leagues. Me, I just like to talk about Rich Mullins. So this is kind of our way to talk about the dorky stuff that we are obsessed with.
Yeah, which you approached me and another mutual friend of ours, Andrew Montanera, when you were writing that last article. I'll plug Post Consumer Reports again. You get another cheap plug.
There you go.
And if you read the article, you laid out some really cool scenarios for possible, Rich Mullins, projects that how this material could be handled. Mm-hmm. And I think I emailed you my entire what you call it, but I broke down album by album, every deluxe edition of his album, and all the bonus material that I know is out there that could be included. And so in a way, in a weird, goofy kind of way, it is kind of like a fantasy football sort of thing for people that, like myself, who don't watch football.
Yeah, so what we're hoping, our fellow listener, that we're hoping that you're as obsessed as we are, or maybe you're going to become as obsessed. And there's a good chance that maybe you're not as familiar with his music as we are, but you're going to work your way into it.
This episode, this is an introductory episode. We're going to be talking with Jimmy, but starting on the next episode, we're going to be diving right into Rich's music, and we're going to be starting with his very, very first album, which is not the self-titled 1986 album, but the 1981 Zion Behold the Man album. And what we want you to do is, prior to each episode, we're hoping that our listeners will go listen to the record that we're going to be discussing, because we kind of want to approach this sort of like a book club. We want to, all of us, go in at the same time, having listened to the material, maybe even listen to it a couple times, so that we can have a good discussion on the material, on the songs, the arrangements, the production, everything else. So go out, listen to the albums, and it's kind of our fun way to, because Chris, as you said, we're super fans, but I don't listen to Rich Mullins' music every day. In fact, it's probably been a while since I've listened to one of his albums from start to finish. So kind of the fun part of this project, it's like, revisiting an old friend.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I was going to bring that up too. I'm glad you said that. So here's something that maybe this will just shock some people. I too, Joe, really haven't listened to Rich Mullins' music much in the last few years. And in some ways, some of that's been kind of conscious. It's kind of like, for me in the 90s and even the last, the first 5 years after his death, it was all so intense. Having lost Mullins, it was like, okay, I have to delve as deep into this as I possibly can, because I have to understand. I have to understand why he was taken from us. I have to understand what was his art and his message truly about. And so as a young man, I just immersed myself in it. But then guess what? I'm graduating college. I'm meeting my wife-to-be. I'm figuring out what I want to do with my life. I didn't listen to Mullins so much anymore. And there's been some distance for me. So I think for me, yeah, there's some excitement to actually going back, looking once again into these old songs. I mean, I don't mean this as a boast. I am a musician. But the other day, I was actually just thinking about Mullins as I was preparing for this, to record today and this podcast in general, and I just started playing his songs in my head, and I had most of the lyrics already there, and I only say that is that there are some artists that are so close to us we can just recall their music instantly, and Mullins is one of those artists for me. So anyway, I'm very much looking forward to delving back into his albums and really listening to this Zion album, which most people don't really know much about.
Yeah, absolutely. And for anybody that wants to, listen to that record, I know a lot of people don't have it. It's never been. It was released once in 1981. They sold it at Zion shows. In the very early years. Once Rich became an established artist, it was nearly impossible to get a copy of that record. Thankfully, we have it up on the Ragamuffin archive, and we're going to provide the links for that on our website, which I guess we can mention. Our website is www.betweenthe.songspodcast.com.
Yes, and yeah, we're working on the website, and it'll incrementally build. It'll be really simple at first, so be patient with us. But this podcast should be available in most areas. We're talking Stitcher, iTunes, I think Radio U. Check our website. Depending on what podcast app you use, you should be able to find it. Now, if you have a podcast app and you're like, you guys aren't on there, guess what? You can email us. And so we should also share that. It's betweenthe.songsinfo@gmail.com. That's our email address. Did I get that right, Joe? Did you write that down?
betweenthe.songsinfo@gmail.com. Yeah. We're on social media. We're facebook.com/betweenthe.songspodcast. And we're on Twitter at betweensongspod.
Okay, now, we're going to get into the Be Gods project, and there's a couple of things I want to say about that. But before we do that, we should hear from our sponsors.
Absolutely, and we do have a couple folks we need to thank.
We do. Now, guess what? Joe and I currently we're not making any money from this podcast. This is a labor of love. But one of the things that we wanted to do was to make this a team effort if we could. And so we reached out to a photographer and a musician to help us with the music and the imagery that we're using for our website. Joe, why don't you take one of them?
Well, first, I guess I'll thank Ted Yoder, who I know many of Rich's fans are familiar with Ted. Who he is a hammer dulcimer player. I actually had the privilege of meeting Ted just a few weeks ago. I actually, for those who don't know, and that's a long, long story probably for another day, but I live in just outside of Window Rock in San Benito, New Mexico, very close to where Rich lived on the Navajo reservation. My family and I live out here as missionaries, and Ted was actually in Albuquerque, New Mexico, just a couple weeks ago, and he was actually playing this great show in someone's backyard. And my family and I drove out there. We got to meet Ted, and he is just as warm and gracious as a guy as you can possibly imagine, and just phenomenal. He closed the show with Hotel California on the hammer dulcimer, and I think it was like a standing ovation. People were going nuts.
I can't imagine. I would love to hear it. Now, Ted, I really got to know Ted through a viral video. It was the Tears for Fears song. What was it?
Everybody Wants to Rule the World.
Everybody Wants to Rule the World. It was this video that was just getting shared all around Facebook, and And it was just, again, like another brilliant, beautiful cover. I don't know how he does it. You know, how he kind of thinks in his head, yeah, I'm going to arrange these 70s, 80s pop songs and make them my own. He really does.
I was talking to the lady whose house it was that they were having the party, and you know, we were, there was like a kind of a neighborhood block party, so they knew everybody there except for my wife, my son, and I. So
okay.
We got these kind of stares when we came in, like, I think these are party crashers.
That's great.
But we were talking to her, and she got to know Ted through that viral video. She didn't know who he was until about a year ago when that video went viral, and she was just blown away and invited him to come out and play her barbecue. And so knowing that we wanted to have some hammer dulcimer music as part of this podcast, we thought, well, let's reach out to somebody like Ted Yoder, who's got some great, very Mullins-esque music. And Ted was just so happy to contribute some music to us for the podcast. So thank you, Ted Yoder.
Yeah, so the intro song that we're going to have for every episode, it's called The Measure, and it's from his album Chocolate Skies.
That's a great album.
Yeah. Check out tedyoder.com, and he has a number of albums, and who knows, maybe you can find a backyard concert for you to attend. I do know that there's a hammer dulcimer festival coming up in Morris, Illinois sometime this summer, and I'm praying that my family might be able to jaunt up there. It's only like an hour and a half away, so it's not too far from me. So maybe I'll get there. We'll see. All right. Our next somewhat of a sponsor is a photographer, and so our image is taken from David R. Banta's photography. And again, this is another one of those things that just kind of popped into my frame of reference. Being part of Rich Mullins groups on Facebook, there's this one guy, and he just posted this image, and it's just this striking image of Rich in the back of a truck. What did you think about it?
It's a great picture. I think if I remember correctly, it was taken at the Cornerstone Festival around '93. And it's cool because it was a black and white image that he sort of colorized himself, and it looks great. It's just a cool picture. It's got Rich with his mullet in all its glory.
His mullet in all of its glory.
Yes, and but it's just a cool photo of him in his pickup truck, and he's just got this great smile, and it's I remember you mentioning that there are these iconic images of Rich. There's the arrow pointing to heaven picture, and the song's cover where he's got the hands over his face.
Yes. And
those are kind of they've become iconic pictures. This to me is right up there with all of those.
Yes. Yeah. All I wish is we could just Photoshop out the mullet. Maybe, I don't know. It really pains me to have to go and admit that yes, Rich Mullins had a mullet. Sometimes he just had long hair, which I'm pretty much okay with his long hair. It's the mullet that just it makes me a little uncomfortable.
It's the Mullins mullet.
The Mullins-et. Yes. Well, nonetheless, this photograph was by David R. Banta, and you can check out his website, davidrbanta.com. And when you go to his website, you're going to find out that this guy is a fine art photographer. He has some beautiful work. It's not just of CCM artists. He has some really, really great landscapes and cityscapes and all this just portraits of people. He's able to capture some great moments. Again, David Banta just gave us this photograph. He allowed us to use it. It's his generosity, and so I'm just really grateful.
And you can also go on Facebook and you can like his page at David R. Banta Photography.
There you go. So those are our sponsors. Now, let's get to the Be Gods Project. Joe, here's what I want to hear from you. What can you tell us, not about the book or the documentary, but tell us a little bit about where these supposed unreleased songs came from that are going to be on this Be Gods Project that Jimmy Abegg is putting together?
Okay. Well, this was kind of the, if there's anything that, to the Rich Mullins super fans that was somewhat controversial when this Be Gods Project was announced, they were sort of being touted as we've got 10 never before heard Rich Mullins demos. And everybody, our ears sort of perked up and we're like, whoa, never before heard Rich Mullins music. Well, this is great. And I remember early on having the conversation going, but I wonder if these are the Beth Lutz tapes. And anybody who's not familiar, Beth Lutz, who was Beth Snell, she was a member of the group Zion. She was a really close friend of Rich's, going back to college and through the rest of Rich's life. And she has a huge collection of cassette recordings that she made. These predate Zion. We're going back to like 1974, 75. Some of these tapes.
The college years.
The college years,
yeah.
and after the college years,
and a little bit after,
into the early '80s. And so she has this collection of tapes that she recorded, and about 6 years ago, I'm thinking it was, she started sharing this music gradually, slowly. She would share a track here and there on YouTube, and she started a Facebook page, and you can like it on Facebook. I think it's Rich Mullins Early Music, and that is the name of the YouTube channel. Well, there are well over 100 songs on YouTube right now, and many of those have been there for the last 5-6 years. And come to find out, our suspicions were correct. These were the songs that are going to be featured on this project. So they aren't really never before heard, but by and large, most people have not heard these recordings.
Yeah, and so this is part of what's strange about living in this age of the internet, which is that these songs have just been out there. They're in a way they're free for the public to enjoy, but unless you have somebody to direct you there, you're not going to know they exist. And so a few years ago, I put out an article on Post Consumer Reports saying, behold, the vast Rich Mullins library that exists. Now, when I did that, Joe, the Ragamuffin Archive was part of that, and you and I maybe had just started kind of like saying, hey, I was kind of like, hey, so who are you? Who is this guy that has the Ragamuffin Archive? And so we were kind of making our initial contact, right?
In fact, you asked if you could interview me.
I did.
And I politely declined. Because at that time, I had a little bit of a sort of a sensitivity to it. I didn't set out to become the Ragamuffin Archive, so to speak. It's just an interesting story. I've told it on your podcast. I won't tell the whole story. If they want to hear that, they can go to Post Consumer Reports podcast. Yep. But long story short,
it's from last summer. I think around June or July last year. That's when the episode was up. So yeah, check it out.
Yeah, but long story short, I somehow found on my doorstep 3 boxes of Rich Mullins rare recordings,
like a little orphan.
Exactly. It was they were in a basket,
and a stork was flying off, right? A stork was flying off in the distance.
But it was to a long-time Rich Mullins fan, it was absolutely shocking to me to find out that there was this much quality unreleased stuff out there, from concerts, interviews, demos, seminars, everything else. And so I started putting the stuff up on the Ragamuffin Archive, but I was a little bit hesitant to be identified as, that guy, because and you've brought me a long way in the last year, Chris. I'm now I'm here I am now with a Rich Mullins podcast, a self-proclaimed super fan. So the first step to recovery is admitting you have a problem. Part of this
podcast will be admitting how we're dealing with our problem. Are we too obsessed with Rich Mullins? Is there a community of people that are too obsessed with Rich Mullins? We'll figure that out as we go.
This is the first episode, so maybe that answer will evolve. If I had to answer that question right now, I'd say most definitely yes.
Okay. By the way, here's something that we should, this is going to be a long episode. So let's hold off on one thing that we really want to share, which is our Rich Mullins origin stories. I think one of the things that Joe and I should have to prove to you is, are we worthy of hosting this podcast, or are we just lunatics? Are we worth trusting? So
or a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B.
Yes. So our second episode, which will be on the Zion album, we will go into our origin stories. We will prove to you our Rich Mullins pedigree. Joe, you've already kind of gone into it. You've gone. You are the Ragamuffin Archive guy. I'm going to hold off. I'm going to prove later that I am worthy of hosting a podcast about Rich Mullins. Maybe not, but nonetheless, we'll see. But back to Beth Lutz or Beth Snell. So for me, I knew that these songs were in existence. But I'm going to be honest with you. I really haven't taken much time to listen to these YouTube clips. I'm a bit of a music snob. I like to buy my albums on CD or vinyl. I like to sit down with an album. I don't get much pleasure from like clicking through a YouTube page and saying, yeah, I'm going to listen to an album on a YouTube page. And that is nothing to go against the Ragamuffin Archive or Beth and what she's done. It's just not how I like to listen to music. So honestly, I've been kind of waiting for these songs that Beth has to find a proper release. And I've kind of been waiting. And so when the Be God's Project came up, I thought, oh, this could be it. This could be it. This could be happening. And I'm very excited about the Be God's Project. But Joe, I was a little bit deflated too when I found out that there was only going to be 10 of the old songs released.
Yeah, and we know that they have upwards of 150, close to 150 songs at this point that they can pull from.
Yes, and so so some of you might know this, and you can go off and kind of read the article. But and I wrote this article with some ideas of, okay, so there's going to be 10 songs of the old music released on Be God's. Well, what more could be done? And honestly, that wasn't born from just me. It's from yourself, Joe, and even our friend Andrew. We had some initial concerns about what the project would look like, and in the midst of all of this, it's really led us back to Beth and asking her about her music. We should cut to the chase. We've been in contact with her ourselves. And, we've been asking her some questions, and she's been asking us questions, and we've given some feedback. And in the midst of that, we got connected to Jimmy Abegg.
Which was just an incredible opportunity for two fans like ourselves. And, one of the cool things that I've got to say is, isn't it like one of the greatest things in the world when you get to know one of your heroes and they don't disappoint you?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And Jimmy is just a wonderful human being, an inspiring guy, and he's, beyond being just truly talented, a humble guy, and there were some conversations even leading up before this podcast about the Be God's Project. He's been very, very open to, knowing what Rich's fans are thinking about this project, what they want to see. And the cool thing, and I think you're going to hear this in the interview, is that this isn't, in his mind, this is just not a one-off sort of do this thing and then be done with it.
Mm-hmm.
He actually truly values not only his longtime friendship with Rich Mullins, but the music.
And so, Jimmy Abegg, if you're listening, you can kind of hear, this was my slight beef with what the Be God's Project seems like it's going to be or would be. And it's this, that our greatest artists, that the ones that are the most renowned in our culture, they get the royal treatment. And it looks typically two ways. And I bring this up really briefly in the interview. I didn't want to get into it too much just because I didn't want to waste Jimmy's time. But it looks two ways. You either get an extensive demos or bootleg or anthology release of a bunch of unreleased music. Most of us know this about, like, with the Beatles anthology. And even right now, the Beatles are re-releasing Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And if you have the dough, you can buy, I think it's 4 extra CDs of material from the Sgt. Pepper sessions. I mean, it's nuts. And so that's one way of looking at it, is to have these bootleg archived albums that are just kind of released almost as a standalone. The other way that you do it is that you reissue their already famous albums, and you include an extra disc. Like I have Paul McCartney's Ram album, which is great, and there's a second disc on there of kind of like B-sides and demos and alternate versions of some of the popular songs. So yeah, it's either option A or option B, and I want to see Rich Mullins get the proper treatment and the respect that he deserves. But guess what? He's a Christian artist. He's a Christian musician. And the system, the CCM system, isn't set up for artists to get this kind of royal treatment.
No, it's not. And, the fact of the matter is, I think I think World as Best as I Remember It Volume 1 and 2 and his self-titled album are available in a 3-pack.
Yes.
And I think the Jesus record was reissued several years ago. Aside from those and maybe songs, the greatest hits package, all of Rich's albums are out of print, which means that, albums like, Liturgy, a Legacy, and a Ragamuffin Band, Winds of Heaven, Stuff of Earth, have been, for years now, unavailable at most Christian bookstores or even online. The Pictures in the Sky album, have you looked to see what that CD sells for on eBay?
No. What is it?
It's insane. It could go for $60 plus.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So, this podcast, it's about Rich Mullins, but it's also asking some bigger questions about the Christian music industry. And I remember years ago, Charlie Peacock came and spoke at a church in the Peoria area here, and he gave a lecture. It was a kind of almost like a scholarly work on the CCM industry. And I remember, this was years ago now. He talked about this. He talked about the fact that countless catalogs of artists are going to go out of print. And I didn't know what he meant at the time. I was like, what are you talking about? This was the high of the DC Talk era where Christian music was exploding. But he saw something coming where the back catalogs of artists are just going to evaporate or just fall into nothingness almost. And so it's interesting that an artist as prominent as Mullins, it's happening to him. Yeah, well, I went and saw about 2 summers back, I went and saw Stephen Curtis Chapman headline at this arena. It was one of these big kind of probably K-Love sponsored concert festivals down near Phoenix, and Stephen Curtis Chapman was a headliner of the particular night I went, and it was a good show. But one of the things that and maybe this is just because I'm getting old, that kind of bothered me was how disregarded his back catalog of music was in that concert. It was a lot of new songs. It was a lot of music from the last 10 years. And then, a couple, he played Dive and he played The Great Adventure. But every other old song that he played that night was jammed into a couple medleys. It was like, I'll sing a verse and a chorus and then on to the next one. And I go, man, he played a few bars of Lord of the Dance and then went to the next. He didn't even sing it. And I thought, well, that's a great song. Sing that song. That is a great song.
Yeah, and I remember hearing an interview with Mac Powell from Third Day, and they did that tour with Stephen Curtis Chapman last year, and where Third Day backed him up, and they were kind of like a band together on the tour. And Mac Powell saying, man, I was so upset that he didn't have Lord of the Dance in the set, so I basically begged him to do that song, and Stephen was like, yeah, I have to relearn it. I don't remember how to play it.
Yeah, sure.
But, all that to say that I think even to stay somewhat relevant in, the Christian music industry, so to speak, many of these artists have sort of even shied away from their back catalog and, have attempted to even tailor their sound to stay relevant. And I think that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Because, some of what made them great artists is being, I think, lost in this whole trying to keep up mentality. You know what? I have a feeling that this theme will keep coming back over and over again. So we'll get back to that. I have one last thing to say, and then we should really get to our talk with Jimmy. And here's what I wanted to say. Jimmy's project is called Be Gods. Joe, you have a line of hats. It's Be Gods. I have of my only Rich Mullins autograph is from the Never Picture Perfect album, and in it he said, "Chris, be Gods," and he scribbled his Rich Mullins autograph. Mullins' saying was "Be Gods,"
And I don't think it's an accident that Jimmy chose that. And so here's what I want to do. This is my promise. I think, Joe, I think I can, be confident enough to say that this is our promise together. We want to allow Rich Mullins' music to be God's. We want to allow Rich Mullins, the man himself, to be God's. The problem with being a superfan is that you sink your hooks into the artist, and you think you own the artist, you think you know the artist. And when that starts to happen, problems arise, and you kind of find yourself in a dangerous spot. And so for me, I guess I want to make a pledge and say, listen, here's my promise. I want to allow his music to be God's music. I'm not claiming ownership over it. Of course, we're going to spend hours talking about it, but at the same time, I'm gonna take my hands off and say, this is not mine. This is something way bigger than myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And we want to do this in a respectful way. And the thing about that too, let's keep it real for a moment. I can't speak for Rich Mullins, and he's not here to speak for himself, but the reality of it is that Rich Mullins may have hated the idea of two guys sitting and talking about his music.
Uh-oh.
And having an entire show dedicated to it.
We're the worst, Joe. We're the worst.
It is what it is.
All right, we're done.
but it's, the last thing we want it to be is a bunch of idol worship.
Yeah.
What we want it to be, we want to reflect on this man's art that has had a huge impact in both of our lives. And I guess we'll get into that a little bit in the next episode. But he has had a profound impact in our lives. And I know a lot of people, and I've met a lot of people who have been impacted just through the Ragamuffin archive, over the last 7 years. I mean, I have received thousands of letters and messages and comments from people who have been deeply affected by Rich Mullins' life, his music, and his ministry. And so there's no doubt that he, without making it all about him, I think, we would be doing a disservice if we didn't point out that all of this was pointing to something greater than Rich Mullins. And the effect that Rich Mullins had on people's lives really didn't have so much to do about Rich Mullins other than his obedience in the calling to the God that he served.
Yeah. So that's our stance. That's our pledge to you. This has been a long intro, and we thank you for listening so far. But now we're going to go to our talk with Jimmy Abegg and to hear more about the Be God's Project and how that campaign is going.
My pleasure.
Jimmy, do you have any questions for us before we begin? Any things that you want?
No,
okay.
Not at all.
Cool.
I'm an open book. I hope I can be helpful. The funny thing about this whole pledge campaign is I think that I was rather naive about how it's done in terms of promotion, etc. I'm really crippled on social media because I can't navigate very well. And so rather than attempting to navigate and meeting with frustration, I just say, screw it. If somebody needs me, they'll call me.
Okay.
So I think what I'm trying to say is that I thought things would just kind of erupt and I could watch it from afar and then administrate the delivery of these great, these great creative ideas.
I think we're a little bit surprised about that too, actually. We know there's more than like 400 Rich Mullins fans in the world.
Exactly. I mean, here's a guy who had, at least in the U.S., pretty high saturation level.
Yeah.
Sold, probably lifetime multiple millions of records. I guess, though, that you just forget that that was 20 years ago. So.
Yeah. I say this with a little bit of irony, but when I was talking to somebody, that this project should be a no-brainer. This person said, "Yeah, but Mullins is dead." And I thought, oh, what a wonderful point. Yes, you're right. He is dead.
I remember that conversation, and it was I remember what he said. It was that you were bringing up the point that, well, how come the 77s and all these other groups can go do these crowdfunding campaigns and they get massive support? And he said, well, you know, they have the advantage of being alive and being out there to sell themselves, essentially.
Yeah.
True. I guess I didn't consider that. I mean, the funny thing about my position is that I have a unique set of friends that allow me access to what I think is rare and rarely seen film footage, photography, some unusual writing that I know for a fact has never been seen or read. And then, of course, I came a little late to the party with Beth. I had assumed that not many people had heard any of those demos, and it turns out now that I'm deeper into it that they've been around for a while, that she's been using every effort to try to get that work distributed and published and heard because she thinks so highly of it. And so that was the one piece of this that was really surprising to me, that there was this cache of, you know, kind of lots of hit and miss, but lots being the big active word. I mean, I was surprised that as we got deeper and deeper into it, you know, I think she's loaded me up with over 100 demos. So that came as quite a shock to me.
The thing about that too, you know, they have been around for. Some of them have been, I think, have been on the YouTube for probably about 6-7 years, maybe. But, But if you look at the number of views that they have, they're still relatively unheard. I mean, the song that you guys previewed as one of the songs that's going to be on the project, I think, what did it have, Chris? Maybe 300, 400 views?
Yeah, that's about it. Yeah.
Yeah, in the face of somebody who conservatively, I mean, I could see, you know, 10 or 20,000 people right out of the gate wanting to hear that, if they're anything like me. But, you know, it's cool because what that has precipitated, it's funny you should say, yeah, but Rich is dead. The interesting thing is that the guy I'm collaborating with, you guys know of John Painter?
Oh,
yeah.
Big fan, yes, very much so.
Okay, well, John and I are going to be doing the music side of it, and we met last week to discuss it looks like we're going to try to figure out how to do this regardless. And I think what he said was, have you thought of lifting his guitar vocal or his piano vocal and letting us assemble a band around it so that he is still the singer, and, you know, for better or for worse, he's the fundamental accompanist, and then we can just build tracks around that. And I got really excited about that idea because, in fact, we would get to reinvent a handful of songs that have pretty much never been heard. I mean, granted, 300 people have heard it, but in terms of a national footprint, you know, no one has heard that stuff. And that's very exciting to me because I think that there's enough work in there that now it should be noted that, you know, there's probably a reason why most of those demos were never recorded. But I think that I have just in a sort of a brief glance and listen to everything that Beth has sent me, there are more than 2 handfuls of great material. So that being said, I have a new excitement and creative impulse about how we can deliver something fresh on the music side, and knowing fully well that nobody's seen most of the photography or most of the video that we have, and the fact that, you know, we've got Michael going to do a medley soundtrack kind of a thing over the movie. I think that's going to be a real asset for everyone. You know, it just feels right.
Now with the recordings from Beth, the ones that you've sort of selected that you're looking at to use for the project, especially for something like this where you would go into, sort of creating a production around it, and kind of what you guys did on the Jesus record on that Where I Am There You May Also Be. Is the quality up, of those recordings up to snuff for that?
No, not necessarily, but I think that because they're fundamentally okay, John is looking into that right now. We're thinking that we can clean up, obviously, the frequency, the band. You can't see me, right? So I can't really talk with my hands, but let's say that the frequency band on a normal recording with original, mics and tapes or whatever, digital or otherwise, let's say it's 12 inches wide. Well, in this case, we're working with the inner 2.5 inches or so of frequency response. But there are ways now to kind of, select the frequencies that we want to make a big deal out of. Mostly the ones where his voice lives. We could probably lose the guitar, lose the piano, if necessary. However, they both occupy a similar frequency range, so that might be challenging. But what we're really interested in doing is getting rid of the hiss and the kinds of audio information that is just from flawed, medium, i.e. old cassette tapes. I think that these are largely, if not all, from cassettes.
I think Beth has told me, if I remember correctly, this was an old Radio Shack cassette recorder that almost everything was recorded on.
Right. So, but she tells me that she thinks she has all of the cassettes, and that's going to be critical to this process. So at some point soon, she'll probably drive or mail me. Okay. Knowing her, she'll probably drive down with something in hand.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. So you're going to want the actual cassettes, not some MP3 off of the internet.
Yeah, we kind of want. We really need the original, and I think John has the software, and he's out on the search for the right deck to play with, to play them on, to remove any unnecessarily annoying junk. Although I think it's also kind of charming. It's like, to me, one of the beautiful things about the Jesus record, and I've done a straw poll over the years, and it's really fun to discover, and this is a discovery I made probably 10 years ago, but people prefer not that the record itself isn't awesome, but people tend to prefer the cassette demo over the re-recorded version. So that is part of what lit the fire in me on the first place, because I knew I had a few of those that I could get my hands on prior to the formality of meeting Beth repeatedly, because we had a discussion about that, and I had some mutual friends who were certain. Don Donahue, who was our A&R guy at Reunion for years, through my entire career with Rich, really, had a box full of demos. Reed Arvin, who produced all of the early records, told me that he had a box full of demos, and then Mike Blanton, the record label head, also told me he had a box full of cassettes that I could have. So I was getting a yes. Interesting thing is that before I met Beth, I had access to probably, we were estimating there might be 90 songs that were recorded career-wise from day one, starting with Sing Your Praise all the way through to the end. So I had no idea, though, that there were these unrecorded demos that no one had ever heard of. I was just going to get the demos of, the earlier music that we wanted. I was going to have to listen to all that and make some selections, but it was going to be selecting from previously released, previously recorded demos of songs that exist. So I had no idea that there was a whole nother gob of songs that had never been professionally recorded.
So if I could ask a follow-up question.
Sure.
It's kind of it's partial statement, but it's also really I'm really curious about what your answer to this might be. In the quote unquote secular industry, there's typically two options when it comes to these kind of unreleased or back catalogs. One is to release an anthology, or like with Dylan, it's like he has his bootleg series. So that's one option. The other option is to reissue all of their studio albums and then add a bonus disc to all the studio albums.
Yeah.
And those are, either way, they're kind of cool projects. And
totally.
And in my heart, in my little kid heart, I'm 12-year-old me. I'm like, oh, please. I'm thinking, okay, so the Be Gods could be the start of maybe kind of like an anthology series, something along the lines of what the Beatles released or the bootleg series that Dylan has released. I guess I'm kind of curious. The Be Gods campaign, it's at 86% as of today. I feel like it probably might be able to get past it. We can talk about the whole. Is it going to get past the 100%? We can talk about that in a second. But I'm just kind of curious. Is it, is more than a 10-song, demo CD? Is there more of a future to this idea of what we could do with the rest of these songs?
Well, in answer, in simple terms, yes.
Okay.
However, that means I need a partner who can, because what happened to me, I'm going to say about a month ago, and Joe is aware of this because I've talked to him a couple of times, and Chris, I'll be happy to have a phone call with you soon, anytime as well. But the interesting thing is, it occurred to me when I was looking at the outcome and being less than happy about it, because I had felt like this was not my dream. I might be the way it gets done, and because of my place in the world right now, I felt like I had easy access to try to get the right people to help me pull this together.
Yeah.
And I enjoy great favor with my friends because I'm just frankly a good friend, I guess. So with that in mind, when I saw this thing starting to really disappoint me in terms of looking like we weren't going to get to even do anything because of money, I started kind of creatively exploring how could I find somebody to help. And what that means is, I think part of it was that I realized it would be a tragedy to have all this work and effort go into a project that maybe 350 people get, and then it's dead.
Yeah.
And so for me, I wanted to reach out to a record/music distributor company friend who could come alongside me with promotion and marketing after the fact. In other words, I didn't want any creative input, but I definitely wanted their long arm of salesmanship to help me generate a piece of product that would have a lifespan beyond the pledge campaigners. In other words, let's say we made this record. I want to do a deal with somebody who will then sell it for the next 10 years, And what that created, because I think I could do that with each piece of this project. The film have its own distribution company. Somebody would just buy it and or not buy it, but license it to get it out there, manufacture it, etc. The same with the book. I discovered a few weeks ago. I did a book with Stu G. Actually, I did a record with Stu called The Beatitudes, and he had written a book. And I went to the book release and met a guy who turns out I've known for 32 years, who expressed great interest in the book that I'm working on. So I invited him to consider being our publisher of note, and he can take the book, create a life behind it, and with regard to the record side, I have a friend who's about to take over the leadership at the biggest Christian music company in the world. So he has been with me a long time fan and friend, one of my closest friends, and he is considering what I've delivered, which is, first of all, I'd like for him to help me with this two record set. We have talked about the idea of re-releasing all of the old product. We're still, the curtain has not been pulled, but I would like to be able to, if this got off the ground, we could do something like you're talking about. I described to him that there's a whole crucifixion sequence that could be a special record project. There's probably enough material here for about 5 years of output, and then that would not include re-releasing everything again on vinyl, starting with, the beginning, although that's still kind of in jeopardy because that's owned by a known, I'm not sure how I would call them. They buy apartment buildings and then don't rent them out, but they hold on to the real estate. And so, in an analogy in the music business, I know who's sitting on all of that Mullins stuff, and I think they're going to be sitting on it until somebody has the right amount of money. So that may be impossible because clearly without a financial partner that could never happen unless we stumbled across a multi-billionaire that was just loving the idea of throwing money on something that could potentially not have much return.
Jimmy, quick question. How angry does that make you?
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, I've got records that are being held captive as well, and my whole career could be a testimony to how corrupt the music business is, even in Christian circles.
Well, and the thing about that, with what you're saying, to me, Liturgy, Legacy, and a Ragamuffin Band is to Christian music what Pet Sounds is to pop music. And
it's the best record out there.
In my opinion, yeah, I agree with you. But the fact that album has been out of print for who knows how long now.
I know.
Is insane.
I agree. Well, that will be my first challenge because that's the one that I want. If I only get one swat at this, that's the swat I'm going to take because that record to me, and not because I'm on it or anything, it's a high watermark for his writing, his conflicted personality, his his theology, his philosophy, and then sonically, I don't think it gets better. I think actually in re-listening to that over the last 6 months, it's part of what has led me to decide not to re-record some of that stuff. In fact, I may not record any of the songs off of Liturgy just because I think the recordings are so definitive. Unless I could get Dolly Parton and, I don't know, some big hitters to sing some of this stuff, it's not worth ruining what is already fantastic. I've just had to do some self exploring to recognize that record is as good as it gets.
Well, for the tribute CD, because for listeners who may not be aware, with the Be God's Project, it's a 2 CD set, a CD of demos, and a tribute album. Now, I guess what I'm not sure of is if you end up going the direction you're looking at, and you have you build an album around those demos, will that be the demo CD, or is that the tribute CD, and then is there another disc where they're just the raw demos?
I think it would be just the raw demos and then the finished product. So, kind of like that There I Am from the Jesus record.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is that, and I'm about to do this, in fact, I was kind of waiting until I talked to you guys, hoping that you might have some input for me, but I feel like I'm due to give an update because my angle on all of this, and maybe you can do that by virtue of this conversation, you can put something together, you can send it to my guys at Pledge. You guys both know Derek Webb, or are aware of him.
Yeah.
He's the guy that I would send. I would typically do an audio update, like a voice text, and just send it to him, and then he would, put it up there. So I can't actually do any of that heavy lifting myself anymore because I can't see. But interestingly, I think that our conversation today signals a change for me in terms of how I feel like we could collaborate, update the pledgers, because I think the pledgers need to know this, that this is a moving target, that it's a work in progress. I had what I think is a doable idea, and now it has evolved into something quite different than what I initially pitched. Because initially I thought I was going to get a bunch of my friends to sing a song, everybody would sing a song. We will still do a little bit of that because, after all, somebody's going to have to sing along with Rich. That sounds like a tagline right there, sing along with Rich. So I feel like it's time to kind of spill the beans. There is this sense in me that I either when it looked clear that we weren't going to get anywhere near our goal, because I don't know if you guys both know this, but our goal was representing about a third of what we know the budget would be to do a book, a record, and a DVD. Each piece of this was going to potentially, at a low end, going to be about $30,000 a piece. And so Derek felt like the philosophy of getting to our goal quickly would signify additional partners, and that philosophically would then get us from 30 to 90 quicker. And keeping in mind, none of us want anything from this. We're not trying to raise money for us. We're not trying to make money off the dead guy. We're trying to celebrate an important footprint of faith musically in the 90s. So imagine if we were trying to scoop a little off the top to pay ourselves. It became clear to me that this is a total nonprofit by definition. And so that calls on a little deeper commitment from everybody on the creative side to collaborate and to put something together at the lowest price point possible just to deliver. And when I realized we were getting scarily unsuccessful, I had considered at least 2 weeks ago just pulling the plug on the whole thing. And Derek talked me down off that. He felt like there were lots of things we could do to get this thing going again. And Beth did the same thing. Of course, you know how passionate she is about this. And the other thing that you guys should know is that instead of it having a deadline of September 19th, which is clearly going to be difficult at this point, 6 months ago it wasn't. Now it's obvious that we're going to have that move. The publisher, if in fact he agrees to help with the book, he's suggesting a release in 2018. My record company partner is suggesting the same. So I'm thinking that we might just have a few things to put out early, in September, like 1 or 2 tracks maybe, and a couple of special EPKs or something, but really treat it more like a year of celebration rather than just a one-off, here you go, and being done with it. So the thing that broke my heart the most was to put this much work and this much effort into something that had a release date, and it would be lost on the majority of the world. We would have 200 books out there, 300 DVDs, and 350 CDs. What a waste of time, both mine and yours. So it feels like we just need the masses to team up with us to make it worth the effort, because it's no small task to do any piece of this.
Well, I remember a few years after he died, you put out, when the Ragamuffin album came out, you put out the Ragamuffin Prayers book. And I bought that at my local Christian bookstore. It seems like a lot of that network just doesn't exist anymore, at least not as strongly as it once did.
You're right, and that's a big part of the problem, is that the usual places have disappeared. Now there's one radio station, I guess, that has satellites all over the country. There's one bookseller. There's one. That whole industry has changed so dramatically that I certainly don't know how to do it. Although I never did. I mean, it should be granted that I was only a creator, not a seller.
Yeah.
So always have left that to somebody else. But that book is a great case in point. That book, it had a limited pressing of 12,000, but it sold out quick. And unfortunately, by the time it reached sellout, the company had folded into another company, and they just didn't re-release it, unfortunately.
By the way, Jimmy, you can listen to your Vector albums on YouTube. They're up there. Did you know that?
I did not. I would like to do that.
But somebody put them up there. I don't know who did it, but somebody did.
I'd like to re-release those.
Yeah, there's some good stuff on there.
Yeah, thanks. I think so too. You mentioned that this project, Pledge Music, and we should mention that Derek did change the finish date. They've extended the campaign.
Yeah, and that's really good news because what's about to happen is I think we're about to get all the legal matters sorted out for the trip to Ireland. It was listed, but it was listed as sorry, sold out.
Yeah.
And the truth is it's sorry, we need to get liability insurance. So once we got that sorted out, which meant I had to start an LLC for myself so that I could be the underwriter to take out a very low-cost insurance policy that turns out is already insured by Pledge. Pledge just didn't know until the attorneys got involved. They didn't even know that they had that in place already.
Oh,
so
really?
They were unwilling to let us launch that until we had all our insurance stuff worked out. And so now that that's all sorted out, because of the delay, we had to move the trip date, and our guy that's handling the trip has had to go back in and reprice. Instead of the trip being in September, it's looking like it's going to be sometime in November. So he's got to reprice all of the lodging, all of the travel, all of the everything. And if you can imagine, it took about 2 months to get it together. And when we couldn't launch it, now we're about 2 months or 3 months behind on updating the pricing. So I was told yesterday that he's about done with that, and we should know by the end of the weekend. So once we launch that, and you guys should both know that the idea of that trip is not, certainly it will be fun, but it will also be expensive and exclusive to people that have money because it's a very expensive outing. But because of the way it's built, the agent has to get a piece of the action. Obviously, airfare is maybe included. I don't even remember now. But it was going to net us, after expenses, the extra $60 that we needed to do the book and the DVD. So the trip was going to, in some ways, fund the whole project. The trip was going to raise about $60 out of a gross expenditure. If we sell all 35 seats, it's going to raise about $120,000. Half of that will go to actual costs, and the other half will go to underwrite the book, the film, and the music. So that was part of the strategy going into this, and it just caught us by surprise that we couldn't sell that trip. I know of about 6 people that will buy it tomorrow.
I've talked to 2 or 3 people on social media who said they're considering it if it goes on sale.
Yeah, it will go on sale. So that's also why I'm now slightly more hopeful. And I don't ever really get depressed. I just it's either a win or a lose. And I was starting to side with the lose, thinking, I guess this ain't going to work. It didn't really bum me out in the way that, I would be disappointed, but it's not the end of the world. I mean, it was a good idea. If it didn't work, oh well. I think that in the last few weeks I've discovered that it might be a little deeper than that with me. I felt I started to take it personal. Like, doesn't anybody remember how awesome that was?
I think we were taking it personally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that was funny too, because when Beth informed me that, you know, you guys were surprised that I hadn't reached out to anybody, it's just because I don't know any better. And so when we finally did, even today, I feel like this is a great beginning of a new chapter for the three of us in our friendship. But more importantly, I think you guys can really help me get this thing out there a little better, because I know I'm not doing a very good job.
Well, I know I think I can speak for the two of us. We're happy to help and believe in this. And after talking to you, the thing that impressed me about this is that it's clearly in your heart to honor the legacy of your friend. It's not to, you know, like you said, make money off a dead guy. It's not anything that crass. It's not opportunistic, and it's what you've described to me, and especially with the book and some of the, you know, kind of previews they've shown in the book. There's a lot of heart and soul going into this thing, and it's a beautiful product.
I agree. I think that if, you know, given the luxury of completing it, I think it will be really one of those benchmark pieces. And that's another reason why, in some ways, I kind of want to wait until 2018, since we've gotten a little bit of a hiccup start, to have a couple of people who might know something about what you were talking about, Chris. How do you go buy a book like this these days? You know, I mean, my friends that do that at Nav Press, I mean, they're still in business. You know, they're still selling books, and I think that they know how to do that, and where this would have to sit. And so I'm very excited about those conversations I'm having with the publisher there, because he seems to have very keen insight and very keen awareness, because they're struggling like everybody else is, you know, with the demise of the music business. And it's not just in CCM, it's everywhere. You know, I'm very close to a group of people here in Nashville that are running a very successful secular music business, and man, they work real hard to do what they do, and they are very, very good at it. And it's a lot like this, in that it is a very kind of persnickety, hidden fan base. You know, Third Man Records is an outreach of indie rock that is really rare. And I think that the true fan gets it, but everybody outside of that could care less. So they're delivering incredible product to a very interesting niche, but they're doing it very successfully and with great artfulness. And I think that should serve as you know, I know it can be done. I just think it needs the right set of brain power.
Do you know Jack White? Am I hearing that?
I do.
Okay.
My daughter married one of the three Third Man guys. Okay. There's a guy named Ben Blackwell, who's the head of the vinyl distribution division. Wow. And there's a guy named Ben Swank, who is the GM of the whole thing. Okay. And he's my daughter's husband. So I'm very close to what they do over there, and am friends with all of those folks.
Very cool.
Well, I want to go back for just a second, and you alluded to the possible existence of other demos and recordings aside from the 100+ Beth Lutz tapes.
Yeah,
I've got to ask you about one song in particular that I've been looking for it forever. To me, it's like the holy grail of lost Rich recordings. I think it's I've probably built it up in my mind much bigger than it really is. It's the song Charlie.
Okay, yeah, I know that song. He played that song for me. Well, I was in the room on multiple occasions, but he played it specifically for me in Houston when we were doing the Cademan Call video, Hope to Carry On. And he sat there in the pub and he played it. And it's funny because that keeps coming up repeatedly, and I happen to know that there is a copy of it. I know that it exists. I can tell you that it's going to be tricky, just judging from the climate that I'm getting a response feedback from. That will never get recorded.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, You've made my day knowing that it's out there. I think there's a 10-second snippet of it that's been around.
Really?
It's on the Caedmon's.
Yeah, Caedmon's Guild DVD. They put out the making of that music video. And so Rich was playing 10 seconds of this song that nobody knew what it was forever.
Here's the interesting thing. Ben Pearson and I are the guys that shot that video. So, and we had an audio guy with us, and we have all of that stuff. So my suspicion is that Ben and I actually shot the whole thing, top to bottom, complete with audio. But we're just in the. I talked to Ben last night, and he's found a guy that has a certain unique, rare piece of video transfer gear, because a lot of this footage is on D2 and beta, and outdated formats that the replay equipment doesn't even exist anymore. So he's been on the hunt to get somebody with a machine so that we can digitize all of the stuff that we have, both film, beta, D2, and digital, so that it can all be in the same format, so that they'll have something to edit with.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks for the info on that. To let the listeners know, though, just without going into too much detail, that's one of his more controversial songs.
Yeah, isn't it the dude that has a colostomy bag?
That's the one.
Yeah.
Yep. Rich wanted them to do that song on one of his records, and I'd have to read Arvin about it, but it seems to me like the arguments ensued and that there was no way that was going to happen.
Because of the content, is that right? It's just too...
Because of the content, yeah. It's just too risky, too graphically weird.
My understanding...
You know the lyrics?
I don't know the lyrics. My understanding is that this is the best of my knowledge, that it's been described as an analogy wherein Rich used the colostomy bag as an analogy for the American church.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And I'm pretty sure we can get our hands on that, but wish me luck.
You got it.
It's one of the ongoing questions that I kind of have for people that are in Mullins' circle is it tough to somewhat live in his shadow? And I even say that as somebody that I'm a fan of yours. I own your solo records. I've followed your photography and your work with Kevin Max and just things that you've done. But yet here you are. You're being asked more questions about Rich Mullins. Does it ever get tough for you? And all of the other ragamuffins.
Well, I can only speak for myself. I don't mind it at all, because that was a 10-year. That was a good chapter for me and my family. I mean, Rich was largely responsible for, supporting me for at least 4 or 5 years, just because of touring and record making and this, that, and the other. And so, in real terms, he functioned for me both as an inspiration and affirmation. He was one of my friends that just loved everything I did. He was constantly badgering me to do a solo guitar record, for example, and he was badgering me to do this and that and the other. I really, like the rest of us that are left behind, I really I miss that, among other things about him, that he was a great ally and a great friend in terms of pushing each other towards creative endeavor, and especially in terms of how we see our lives. My wife and I have lived, we think, by faith for our entire married life. Now here we're approaching 39 years together, and we really feel like God has had his hand on us through thick and thin, and a call on our lives. And it's rare that you meet a friend who can relate on those terms. Even my kids don't quite understand what the hell Dad is doing right now. Why are you going back to dig up this old stuff? And I haven't really been able to have that conversation with each of them independently, but I think they they have enough faith in me that I might be doing the right thing, but they also have enough kid, angst that they're going, Dad, what are you doing? Nobody cares, and they're partly right, because I think that there is a huge part of the earth that I've seen, at least in the last few months, that could care less. I've left you both speechless.
No, it's okay.
I'm hoping you're wrong.
Yeah.
I'm hoping you're wrong. We've been sufficiently underwhelmed by the response on the project ourselves, so I can't argue with that, except to say that, in some of the closest friends in my life have been made through a connection with Rich Mullins' music. That's how Chris
me
and I
too.
Chris and I wouldn't know each other if it wasn't for Rich Mullins.
Yeah. And I wouldn't know you if it weren't for him. So there you go.
Yeah, exactly. And so you look at that and you go, the connections that people have been able to make through this guy, who's been gone now for 20 years this September, and the fact that not only that we're sitting here talking about him, but that there are thousands and thousands of Rich Mullins fans who are still talking about him. We see it in social media all the time.
Exactly. And our job is to try to capture them and surprise them with joy that there is something coming down the pike that is, I think, I don't want to be too boastful, but I just feel like I'm sitting on something that is really potentially impactful and important to do. And I've confided in Beth on this, that I've decided to be deliberately waiting, because I can't go forward knowing that the desire is out there to hear this, but we have to be ingenious enough to uncover where they must be hiding, because they're clearly not on social media, not all of them, and they're clearly not in the normal channels. We've worked for, I know Dawn has spent a month trying to get a hold of, there's apparently a Rich Mullins Facebook fan site with 55,000 people signed up on it, and we can't get access to those people for some reason through some technicality on Facebook. And we also know that it's a bot site, BOT, robot.
Yeah.
Facebook invented it to serve that public, and we're trying to figure out how to crack into it, because we know that the large majority of our Pledge supporters have come from Facebook. Pledge would like to do some evangelism on our behalf, but their hands have been tied because of this trip. They can't advertise it until that thing is launched as well. So the collective agreement is that when the trip goes live starting next week, and we can do a couple of these updates like I hope we can do together, the three of us, I think that we have a better chance of uncovering those hidden fans. I mean, he didn't sell millions of records to nobody.
Yeah.
No, and I think I remember you telling me on the phone that right now I think there's about a little over 400 people have pledged, and you said every night you played with him there was more than 400 people in the audience.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely, except for Tuba City.
Well, what you gonna do?
Yeah.
Jimmy, I know that there was a fundraiser for your own studio. I'm curious.
Yeah.
It seems like you've got a lot going on, but how's the studio coming, and what kind of projects do you have ideas for yourself? I mean, I would love a Jimmy A solo record at some point, personally.
Thank you. Well, that's happening.
Awesome.
I've got 3 actually kind of ready on deck. The interesting thing about that is that kind of came, I was blindsided, no pun intended, but when I started to lose my vision in a big way, I was also losing my current studio space, and the truth is I haven't been able to drive for a couple of years. I'm quickly losing my ability to read. So we've kind of been trying to hurry up and get me a space in my backyard. I have a home in East Nashville and a enough room in the back to build a garage kind of place for me to work. And some people came alongside me and helped me assemble a fundraiser, which was successful. We raised about 30 grand in a night, and then that has gone on. I think we've peaked out at about 65 right now, but meanwhile, we had plans drawn. We are, as of today, I have everything I need except the building permit. So I've been struggling this week because I'm immobile. I have to get somebody to take me to codes. My wife and I went down there on Tuesday only to discover that you've really got to get there at 6 in the morning to get in line to get a permit, because they'll only take 35 a day, and there's 67 people online almost every day to get a building permit because Nashville is exploding. So I have made an attempt every day this week to get the building permit so we can get started. And it's been very, very frustrating, but hopefully next week will be different. Monday, I've got a guy that's going to pick me up at about 6 in the morning. We're just going to be the first ones at the door, hopefully, and get that going. We are, talk about underfunded. I thought that was a good amount of money to build what my architect friend designed. And as it turns out, it's about half of the total estimated cost. So we really need to start pouring cement and illustrating our progress so that we can reinvigorate the fundraiser for me, for the studio. But that's also one of the things that has caused me quite a bit of personal conflict. It's like, how can I be raising money for myself and then in midstream raise money for this other thing that seems like it's for me, but it's not. And it's you're right, Chris. This is a challenging time for me, and I'm going to be completely honest with you that I'm a little bit lost. I'm in orbit. Mm-hmm. A couple of things on the home studio side, though, is that it was fundamentally designed to be a place for me to paint, because I know even after I lose my sight, at its end, I have something called macular degeneration, so I'll never be blacked out blind. I can probably still make marks until I'm dead. So we thought that between my guitaring and my painting, my wife and I can survive our autumn years, let's say. And somewhere along the line, some friends of mine thought it would be fun if I had a home studio too, so that they know I want to make some solo records. And they got in touch with a guy named Rupert Neve, who is a renowned recording engineer, console designer.
Yeah, he is.
Who turns out to be an on-fire Christian, lives down next to Billy Crockett in Wimberley, Texas. And Rupert has offered to install a home studio for the blind in my place on his dime. So I think we can expect records from me in the future. So that's very, very exciting. In some ways, that kind of overshadows my interest in the Mullins thing. In some ways, I'd almost like to just toss the Mullins thing and get back to building my studio, because I'm not getting any younger. and it feels like I've spent, 8 months on this Rich Mullins thing, and I've gotten practically nowhere.
Well, one of the things I've remarked with Joe about is I've actually, my observation is that you're the creative part of all these processes. But back in a day when there's a better studio system, you'd have tons of A&R people or just interns even, just helping on the footwork on all these things. It's a lot to ask of one guy who's just really great at playing guitar and writing songs.
Exactly. And that's been pointed out to me, and I know I felt like I tapped into 2 or 3 people that were really going to help me do some of the heavy lifting. Yeah. And as it turns out, Derek's plate is very full because he's running Noise Trade. Mm-hmm. He's running, he's a vice president at Pledge now. Don's got a full-time job. He's helping immensely. But, there's just a lot of cracks in the levee. I can't plug them, which is why I'm so grateful for you two to come along, and Beth, and there are probably countless others out there that if we really put our heads together, we could come up with solutions. It's not surprising that when I asked Michael soundtrack for the film, that he would say yes, because he loves the Rich music. He loves those years. I think he's probably got a few of those in his set, and he's more than happy to help. But again, without somebody kind of pushing a little bit, nobody really gets out of what's laying in front of them today. I've got to mow the lawn. So it's hard to get after that creative stuff when the rest of your life is kind of hovering or on hold or whatever. So, but I think you make a great point, and part of my enthusiasm for this conversation is that I think we can ignite maybe 3 people can do a better job than the 3 that I've got here in town. And we're making progress, certainly, but it's so incremental and it's so admin oriented and not fan based. I've really noticed that I need personal relationships with people who can really kind of catch the vision, combine it with their own vision, which is why I'm so admirable of you two, that you both have said many of the things that I've thought. Your idea of, hey, why don't we, there's enough material here, I could make a record every year for 10 years of old Rich Mullins stuff that nobody has ever heard, I promise. And the same could be said for the idea that there are unlikely recipients. I have always felt like there's a whole new generation that have no idea that this music is as powerful and as meaningful and impactful as it was.
Yeah. It's not an understatement at all to say that Rich's music changed my life.
Yeah.
I became a Christian at 15 years old, and really didn't know who Rich Mullins was until after he passed away, and it was the Jesus record. And that record, wow. I went and bought everything he did, and Liturgy. I mean, that album right there. There's. I remember when I think it was the CCM magazine that put out the top 100 albums of all time, and Liturgy was ranked 3, and I was so offended.
Yeah. What was number 1?
Amy Grant. Amy Grant. Right? No. Amy Grant's "Lead Me On."
Oh, "Lead Me On." Lead Me On. Did she have the number 2 as well?
No, man, I'm blanking on number 2. I don't know.
I wonder if the Keith Green, that first Keith Green.
Oh, I think maybe it was Keith Green. Yeah, that's right. That was number 2.
Maybe it was.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That was a pretty impactful record. That first one.
Yeah.
He lost me after the first one, but man, that one was.
But Jimmy, you're from California though, right? Like, so you maybe you kind of grew up. Are you from California? Or no, you're from Kansas.
No,
I grew up in western Nebraska.
Nebraska.
I moved to California.
Okay.
I moved to California in 1973.
I see.
Right on the edge of the Jesus movement.
Right.
So I got saved promptly and began to work at a place that we had concerts every weekend. So I met and played with all of those CCM people, especially Maranatha Chapel and Sparrow artists that were from Southern Cal. But, we had our own thing that we, based on that influence, we started Exit Records. So, that was an important chapter too, those early days of, John Michael Talbot and Love Song and Keith Green, and, the list is fairly endless. But, I met and became friends with pretty much most of those folks. It's funny that is true. When I meet people now, John Painter, my friend, calls me the Forrest Gump of CCM because I'm in every photo with every artist that he ever admired.
So did you knew Keith?
Well, I would say new is a stretch, but yes, I played with a guy in Sacramento that we did a few dates with him, so we knew him and were around him quite a lot. So for the first couple of years before he moved to Linden, Texas, he and his wife moved to Agape Force, and we were even out there a couple of times with them. So, I knew the second chapter of Acts and all the stuff that we admired just because we were on stage often, supporting those artists, and then later had our own careers that were at least as public as theirs were. We kind of became friends over the years.
Jimmy, I'm just really curious. As you are losing your eyesight more and more, does that make guitar playing difficult?
Only in a couple of respects. It makes the geometry of it, which I rely on, a little more difficult because I can't see the fingerboard. But lucky me, I've been playing for so long that I know where I am. Typically, I can't do the big jumps, from say the 3rd fret to the 12th fret like I used to. There's some things that will be revealed to me over time that may become off limits. But largely, I think that my hearing is getting better. I think my playing, now's my chance to be the best guitar player I can be. So obviously, I think there's a lot to live for there. I don't think it's an accident that I was born to be a painter and a guitar player and be blind. And I think that, not to get too metaphysical about it, but I also think that that's where the cross-section of my life is leading. That's why I'm very happy and proud to be the guy that's kind of at the helm of this Mullins thing. I feel like I'm the perfect soundboard for that, since I can't see very well and I'm really handicapped in terms of getting around, and like I really need I depend on other people far more than I would choose to, and that's both humbling and also affirming at the same time, because every time I ask for something, there's somebody out there that wants to help. So I think that and maybe this is just my dream idealistically, but I just think that there's a lot more to do with regard to the guitaring and a lot more to do with regard to the painting. And I just have to learn to live with my sight, or my lack of sight, because it is getting to be really frustrating.
At this point in the game, do you do anything with photography anymore, or have you pretty much put?
Yeah, I'm toying with it. I've actually got a show in my imagination that would be, I would go out on the subject of choice and make some photography and then develop it and print it and see if it looks like the way I see. Because people always ask me, well, how much can you see? What can you see and what can you not see? And it's so hard to describe, because I can see enough to not trip over a curb or a step, but I can't see a person 6 inches in front of me. I can't see the detail of what color eyes they have, what their skin looks like. I look at myself in the mirror and I just see a smear. So as it pertains to photography, I have some inspiration from an artful standpoint to do some photography that sort of helps explain the way I see. I think that would be good.
Is your peripheral better?
My peripheral vision, I wouldn't know if it's better. It's I can see. I can't see people. I can see their shapes. I can see color. I can see objects in the room. God forbid I have to cross the street, because my depth perception is completely gone. I don't know how far things are away from me. That goes back to building into my life some count on, some familiarity, which is why I need a studio at home. I need to, in my kitchen I can find my way around, but in somebody else's kitchen, man, it's like going to a flea market in, Soho. I can't see anything. The grocery store is like unbelievably confusing. I couldn't go by myself.
My last question for me would be, where do you see yourself, like in terms of your calling? Because you have this maybe this overarching call for the gospel and to spread the love of Christ. But do you feel like you just you have seasons of life where you're more focused on the visual art, on photography, and then you swing back to music? I mean, because in the past few years, I was really happy that you were playing with Steve Taylor, and that's a great record. And
yeah, that's been really fun. That was really life affirming too, because of literally a cast of hundreds of guitar players in Nashville, they picked me to be in that band, and that was a real significant turning point because it met me at a time where I was tired of photography and art, design that is, and was kind of embracing this idea that God wasn't done with me as a musician yet. So I started writing another record. I started getting ready to be that guy that I thought I was in the beginning. And, you know, part of the accident of my life, which I don't think was an accident, but somewhat random in a way, I was always teamed up with what I think are real strong partners. You know, I spent some time with Vector, which I think was insanely good right out of the gate. You know, Charlie for 10 years or so. Once again, you know, I found myself playing with Amy. I found myself playing with Smitty. I found myself playing with Rich. You know, I have inadvertently, accidentally cherry-picked all of the best music scenarios out there by no fault of my own. I never asked anybody if I could play with them. They asked me. So it was an accident of fate in a way, and I really feel like that you're correct, there are seasons, and my blindness now is helping me to ascertain where I should go next. And I think that the easiest fit is for me to stay home, which is why I'm so reluctant to accept traveling dates, because I think there may be a place for me in the future to get out there and play and talk a little bit, because I think I do have some things to say and some gifting in that area. But on the other hand, you have no idea how difficult it is for me, how uncomfortable just to walk out the front door and get in the car and go to I have a temporary studio at one of my kids' house, thankfully. Ben and Jamina have let me use their basement until my studio's done. And every day is kind of a crapshoot. I've got to arrange a ride up there. I've Ubered home a few times because I couldn't find a ride. Life is just really challenging. So for me, you know, I'd like to get this Mullins project done and see if I have the ability to give it to somebody who can carry it through to its immaculate decision and immaculate vision. Therein, like what we talked about earlier, making a record annually, you know, kind of redigging into the old catalog, releasing some stuff on vinyl. I mean, I think there's lots of ripe territory. It's just going to take the right group of people, and I think I might be the guy that sort of paves the way for that, maybe. But in no way do I see myself getting back out there as a Rich spokesman. That's not my gig. I'm barely a Christian, probably.
Join the club.
Yeah. We're all in the same boat.
Ain't that the truth? If there's anything you could say right now to the Rich Mullins fan base about this project, just to share from your heart, what would you say to them?
Well, I would say that this is a unique opportunity to participate in something that has never been done before. There is no authority figure that is looking at the dollar outcome, making decisions about content and artistry. We don't have to dumb it down. We can do whatever the muse depicts. Like in a perfect world, if we rely completely on the Holy Spirit to be our guide, what would we come up with? That's a pretty exciting thought. And here we have a great body of work that is largely unseen and unheard. And I think we have an opportunity as a group of people to fund it, to help it find its home in the hands of tens of thousands of people that have no idea what this is. Music coming from a guy who was a lot like me, not sure about his faith about half the time, and pretty darn convinced the other half. Just that dichotomy of humanity, we don't get that voice much. We hear of people and are friends with people and watch people who with great authority say they know exactly what God wants, and here it is. And I'm the guy that's going to say, man, I got a little bit of an idea, but I can only share the piece that I know about. And I think that that was the beautiful thing about Rich, that he was willing to write about things that were unwritable. I've come to really believe in a term now that is really hitting home, that the best things in life are truly invisible. And I think that this is one of those occasions where the vision for the music, the book, and the DVD are pretty invisible unless you have the imaginative eye that is informed by such depth of reality that I have. I've been at all the photo shoots. I've been at all the video shoots. I've seen all the filmmaking. I've done a lot of it. I've certainly been aware of all of the creative input that went into making Rich successful. And we've seen all of that, but we haven't seen the stuff that got rejected. And I think that's the fun part, is to be in the sandbox full of stuff that, like I've told you before, I'm just astonished when I hear these songs and when I read these words that are from the same guy that was, he could have been a Tin Pan Alley songwriter and never said a word about his faith, and probably been a very successful songwriter because he was very good at it. Mm-hmm. And that was the big surprise to me. I thought he was just a church kid,
Hey, Jimmy, thanks again, man. We'll be in touch with you. Anything we can do to help you, just give us a holler. We're around.
Thanks. Really appreciate it. And I'm serious about some regularity with this. I think it would be helpful. Since there's 43 days left, you guys can talk amongst yourselves, but maybe we could come up with a way every week to do something that you could put up there that would instigate a little more action. Because I think if we talk about it, it gets talked about.
Yeah.
Hey, our pleasure. And really enjoy talking to you.
Yeah, you too.
Bye, Jimmy. So, that was our interview with Jimmy. We really hope you enjoyed it. And one of the things I hope that really came across is he is a gentle spirit. And you know what? Honestly, Jimmy, he probably has a privileged existence. And what I mean by that is this. Yes, he's blind, but he is a true artist at heart. And he is able to he's been able to make art for most of his life and make money off of it because he's truly a creative person. And you know what? I hope you hear some of the struggle in his voice a little bit about how does he get this project going. And so Joe and I have come around, and we want to see the Be God's project succeed. And we don't actually know much right now, but we're hoping that this Ireland trip comes to be available really, really soon. Joe, do we know anything about it yet?
As of today, the day we're recording this podcast, there's 37 days left in the Be God's project, and as of right now, unfortunately, the Ireland trip is not available yet, though we're told it's happening, it's on its way, so just keep checking back at the website. It's pledgemusic.com/Rich Mullins. Yeah.
And Joe, I don't want to be too presumptuous, but I'm pretty sure that since you and I have done all this promotion, that Jimmy's just going to give us a couple of free seats on the Ireland trip, right?
I mean, I assume as much.
Yeah.
I don't. It doesn't have to be first class.
I'll be in Jimmy's suitcase if he lets me on the trip. I'll play his guitar in his suitcase. In the air compress.
One of the things I'm really looking forward to, and thank you so much, Jimmy Abegg, for being on the program with us. And we're looking forward to. We're going to be hearing some more from Jimmy on this podcast later on as we get into some of the albums that he worked on.
Yeah, that's one of the things. We were actually able to talk with him a little bit longer, and he let us in on his years recording and touring with Mullins, and even after Mullins' death. And so we're holding on to some of that, so it's good. Now, Joe, again, part of this 20th anniversary year, 2017, there's other projects coming down the pipeline. What can you tell us about some of those?
Okay, well, of course, we just spent a lot of time talking about the Be Gods, the celebration of Rich Mullins. That one is, I think that's the big one. I think that's the one that most of us are really excited about. But there's some other cool stuff happening. Speaking of Jimmy Abegg, I want to mention that he is actually going to be taking part in a Rich Mullins tribute concert that is happening in August. And that is part of Under the Radar's event, Escape to the Lake. Now, for more information on that, just visit escapetothelake.net. That is happening. It is Under the Radar's, which is this, if people aren't familiar with it, is just a great ministry that really gets indie Christian music out there. I mean, some of my favorite Christian music that I've found over the last 6-7 years has been thanks to Under the Radar. And they are going to be having their annual retreat. And it is going to be in August in Cedar Lake, Indiana. And that's going to be happening August 2nd to the 6th. And on August 4th, I believe it is. Where's it at here? I got some notes in front of me. Yes, August 4th, they are going to be having a Rich Mullins tribute concert featuring Jimmy Abegg. And this is a rare opportunity to see Jimmy. As you heard in the interview, he's been kind of reluctant since losing his sight to take offers to do dates and to do concerts. He's going to be doing a solo show, I know, as part of this event, and he's going to be taking part in the Rich Mullins tribute concert. So, again, for more information on that, you can visit them online at escapetothelake.net. We've got the Andrew Greer book. Do you know much about the Andrew Greer book that's coming out?
So, Andrew Greer is he's an artist in Nashville. I don't know if he's signed or he's independent, but he also works for a Contemporary Christian Music magazine, or at least the website. He has a book coming out. What is the book?
Okay, the book is called Winds of Heaven, Stuff of Earth: Spiritual Conversations Inspired by the Life and Lyrics of Rich Mullins. And this is actually kind of also going to be somewhat tied into the Beth Lutz music. If I understand correctly, the lyrics that they're going to be sort of writing reflections on is some of the unreleased music that Rich never actually published.
So maybe one of our steps is we'll have Andrew on the podcast. Maybe, Andrew, are you out there? You're listening? And we can figure out more about what this book is. Is there a release date on this?
I don't have a release date on it, but It is available right now for pre-order on Amazon. It's $15.99 for paperback, and just go to Amazon.com. If you search for Andrew Greer and Rich Mullins, it comes right up.
Okay. Anything else? Any other projects?
I guess I'll just do a quick little plug on the thing that we're planning out here in Window Rock. We are working on a Rich Mullins tribute concert, honoring Rich and the work that he did in his brief time out here on the Navajo Nation. So we're still in the planning stages. I'm hoping by the next show I'll be able to give you a little bit more details, because we've got some cool guests who are going to be coming out to be a part of that. And what I can tell you right now is that it is going to be happening on Saturday, September 16th. So if you're listening and you want to come out to Window Rock and take part in this event, it is going to be happening Saturday, September 16th. And the other cool thing that's going to kind of go along with that I'm really excited about is that we have recently unearthed an hour-long conversation with Rich that was recorded at our radio station. For anybody who doesn't know, I manage 3 radio stations with Western Indian Ministries. It's a mission just, again, outside of Window Rock. And Rich was a frequent guest on those stations back in the 90s. And we found a tape from March 10th, 1992. It was this is a few years before he even moved here. It was one of his first times visiting, and he had an hour-long conversation in our studio. Part of it aired, some of it has never been heard, and we're currently working on a radio special that is going to coincide with our tribute event, and we're going to broadcast that, and it's also going to be made available online. So there's some really cool stuff coming with that.
Man, it's exciting. And I think what you can tell is, based on all these events coming up this year, that a lot of people cared about Rich Mullins. And so we're excited to do this podcast. It's been a long episode. Again, our hope is that you enjoy talking about and listening to some stories and information about Rich Mullins as much as we do. But please stay tuned. Check out the website, betweenthesongspodcast.com. Check us out. Find us. Subscribe to this. And tell all your friends.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for listening. And hey, Chris, this has been great. I can't wait till next month.
We are so excited to be able to do this and bring this podcast to you. And we hope to see you next time. This has been Rich Mullins, Between the Songs.